Hey, I'm Zach McDonald, your real estate agent with Real Property Associates, and this is my Seattle housing market update for April 2025. What a crazy week it's been in the stock market, and the mortgage market thankfully hasn't been as crazy, but we're seeing rates start to head up towards 7% again, 6.95 today on Mortgage News Daily's survey. And as we're kind of looking at some of the data for King and Snohomish County, thankfully, the housing market seems to be relatively stable and the same as it was as we were wrapping up the month. So if you want to pay attention to King and Snohomish County updates separately, those updates piggyback off the weekly housing market watch. And I think those are helpful. And we look at the weekly data for both counties, and Seattle and Bellevue, which we focus on in this update, are essentially the twin cities, east and west side of Lake Washington. And we're seeing prices nearing all-time highs here, at least in Seattle. $992 was the median sales price in Seattle last month, and that is 7.5% up year over year and just shy of the high in 2022. We're talking about, I think it was 4,000 higher, 996 if I remember correctly. And Bellevue still a little bit off from that high, but nearing it, or at least it was earlier in the year. We're looking at 0.5% up year over year in Bellevue, 2,010,000. Both Bellevue and Seattle are fairly close to their all-time highs, which is encouraging to see after all the turmoil over the past few years with mortgage rates, and then seeing the housing market adjusting, and then even over the last week seeing all the stock market news. Hopefully what I shared earlier in the video is encouraging, that not too much has changed over the past week. But looking at the data as we wrap up March and are into April now, days on market, 6 days on market is the median here, super quick. And again, we're looking at the single family houses. The condos are taking quite a bit longer to sell, and the market there completely different. So that would be a conversation. If you have questions about the condo market specifically, we're not going to focus on that in this video. Sometimes I highlight condos, talk a little bit more about them. But 6 days on market is nice, trending down from a few years ago, but really similar to last year. In fact, exactly the same for Seattle, and only 1 day more on market in Bellevue. Average days on market down, which is what we like to see. 32 days on market in Seattle, 11 in Bellevue. That's 12.5% down in Seattle, 38.9% down in Bellevue. So although Bellevue's median days on market is up a little from last year, average is down quite a bit. And the average and median are pretty close. So that's just meaning Bellevue houses are going to be selling a little quicker than a Seattle house. The percentage of asking price, right? King County as a whole is a little bit less here than the average in Seattle and Bellevue. Seattle across the board, 3.2% over asking price. And of course, this is not neighborhood specific. This is just Seattle as a whole. Bellevue, 5% over asking price, and same qualifier, not neighborhood specific, but Bellevue as a whole. And that's trending up 1% more than last year. Seattle, 0.9%. So essentially 1% up from last year, a little bit more competitive. And that's to be expected as we're seeing the prices coming a little bit closer to where they were before. And this year has been relatively competitive as we've started out the year. I mentioned at the beginning of the year that one of my predictions is that we might see the spring market start earlier, and it did. And it may also end earlier, and we'll see how the rest of the spring wraps up. I wouldn't be surprised to see things starting to slow down mid-May as the inventory's been creeping up here as of late. And in fact, we have seen quite a bit more inventory than we did last year. So this year, 26.7% more houses on the market, coming on the market in Seattle, 887, and for perspective, 700 last year. So quite a bit more new listings. Bellevue, we saw 44.6% more new listings. Last year, 112. This year, 162. So quite a bit more new listings, which is going to increase the amount of inventory. And a big part of that is seeing closed sales remain similar, right? Closed sales were 0.2% more in Seattle at 507 and 63 in Bellevue, down 16%. So we didn't see a big uptick in the closings. We did see an uptick in the pending sales though. So some of those listings did come off the market. 656 or 20.8% more in Seattle, 98 or 6.5% more in Bellevue. So we did see more sales coming off the market, but again, not as many as were coming on the market. So we're seeing the inventory numbers building. And what that means is that we're seeing more homes currently for sale, and that puts less pressure on the existing inventory, which usually leads to a little bit less competition, right? So that's a leading indicator, right, of the competition starting to die down or fewer multiple offers, is just seeing the amount of homes building on the market. So that's why every single week on this channel, we talk about the inventory in the Seattle Housing Market Watch. And that's because it's a huge factor in how much is coming on, how much is coming off, and that plays a big part in what the competition looks like and ultimately the pricing. So homes for sale ticking up, 43.2% more homes for sale in Seattle. Bellevue, 66.2% more homes for sale. And those supply numbers are nearing 2%, which is usually 2 to 2.5% is a threshold where we start to see those competition numbers flatten out. And so this last month, we've seen the competition, but I would expect if these numbers continue to increase and outpace the demand, which is what we've seen over the past month, we're going to start to see the amount over asking price or some of that competition tapering off. 1.8 months of supply in Seattle, 1.6 months of supply in Bellevue, and that's significantly more than last year. So last year, Bellevue was at 1.1 months of supply and Seattle was at 1.3 months of supply. And that plays into what we were talking about a little earlier, and that I think the spring market started a little bit earlier and might not last as long this year in 2025. So if you're somebody who's thinking about selling, this is get your house on the market time, in my opinion, in the general Seattle, Bellevue areas. I think there's still quite a bit of inventory shortage, and just really depends on the price points. And I think there's quite a few buyers looking to purchase this year. But as the spring continues on and as the summer comes, we are likely going to have quite a bit more homes on the market. And I would expect that then we would see less pressure on the prices. We might even see price reductions increasing. And we're certainly, for buyers, going to see a better opportunity with more options and also a little less competition as the year draws on. So if you're a buyer out there, maybe you're thinking about getting started and some of this information maybe sounds intimidating, I think it should be encouraging that we're nearing what I would say is going to be a better time to be a buyer as we finish out the year. So if you have questions about buying or selling here in the greater Seattle, Bellevue metro areas, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to be a resource for you and help however I can. And if you're newer to the channel and you want to just continue following along, maybe you're not quite there yet, but you want to stay in touch and continue learning, please consider subscribing.